our speaker, Emily Gutierrez. Dr. Gutierrez received her doctorate from Johns Hopkins University with a focus in translational medicine and integrative health. She has also been trained through the Institute of Functional Medicine and is a certified practitioner. Dr. Gutierrez received her master's degree in nursing from the University of Texas at Austin and is board certified as a pediatric nurse practitioner and mental health specialist through the Pediatric Nursing Certification Board. Dr. Gutierrez is co-owner of a medical practice, Neuronutrition Associates, in Austin, Texas, where she specializes in functional medicine. And she will be talking to us about neuronutrition after brain injury. Dr. Gutierrez.
Thank you. I'll let y'all get in and get seated. So a lot of people ask me what that alphabet soup is after my name. So it's just Doctor of Nursing Practice and Certified Pediatric Nurse Practitioner and an Institute of Functional Medicine Certified Practitioner. So it's just ridiculous. When you have the MD behind your name, it usually concises it up a little bit. But in nursing, when you keep getting more degrees, it gets longer and longer, and it looks a bit ridiculous, frankly. So I don't have any conflicts of interest or anything to disclose before this talk. And then today we're just going to learn about neuronutrition and what is the gut-brain connection, strategies for controlling inflammation. We're going to talk a little bit about the ketogenic diet, not a whole lot. Different nutrigenomics and biomarkers that make you susceptible for prolonged recovery in traumatic brain injury. We're going to look at also some nutraceuticals that can be important for putting on board after and even before you have an injury. So there's actually no one definition of neuronutrition, so this is my own definition. And it's basically the nutritional science that is related to a person's whole genetic environment and functional nutrient status with the hopes and goals of maintaining the best optimal brain functioning and homeostasis. So Dr. Dilip Karnik is a neurologist that coined this term to me or talked to me a lot about this about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's just kind of stuck, and it's what we named our practice after. We see in our practice, we see a lot of kids with neurodevelopmental disorders. We see concussion and brain injury. And then really just broadly functional medicine, we'll see everybody from sick kids to well kids to things going on within your gut to rare genetic diseases. We see basically anything with any condition. So Dr. Clark did a really good job today talking about the statistics behind brain injury. So I think that the title mild for TBI can be misleading because mild TBI can range from all these symptoms that are just very little and transient, meaning they go away very quickly, to becoming something that's ongoing and very chronic. And it's estimated that about 50% of people with mild traumatic brain injury will develop symptoms that are persistent and about 15% of the time making it really a disabling problem. So here they did a systematic review, which is basically what they do is they jump into what is in the literature and they take all of the studies that study this very particular topic and they pool all of the patients. And in this we found over 4,000 patients. And really what all of these studies said was things can be chronic after TBI, especially with pain, especially with headaches. So that's what we're going to talk about today more is how are we going to deal with the chronic pains, how are we going to deal with the chronic symptoms, and believe it or not, a lot of it has to do with our gut. A lot of times people will come in to see me for different various conditions, and the first thing we'll do is we'll really investigate what's going on within their gut. And this is because our gut is really our enteric nervous system. It's our second brain. And there's cross-signaling that happens via the vagus nerve for things that we're feeling in our head affect our gut, and things that are going on within our gut affects our brain. I always tell my little kiddos, I'm like, have you ever had butterflies in your stomach? And they're like, yeah, there's no butterflies though, right? And no, No, it's a feeling. So a thought created a feeling, and that can happen vice versa, is a feeling creates certain thoughts. So in the literature about 10 years ago, this term called leaky gut was coming around. And you know, I mean, if you talked about leaky gut, you were kind of in the quack, arena, like, what is leaky gut? Nobody's heard of leaky gut. And really, the medical word for leaky gut is increased intestinal permeability. And now in the last couple of years, this has been one of the most highly studied things in the literature. And we're really finding that what happens, how your gut is functioning has a lot to do with how your whole body is functioning. So there's this axis that not a lot of neurologists will sit down and talk to you about the gut, right? They're going to talk about the system that they know, which is the brain and the spinal cord and how that affects the body. But really, there's an axis between the gut and the brain. And when your gut is disrupted, or you have this inflammation in your gut, and the inflammation can lead to increased permeability to those little cells that are stuck together in your gut. If we were to slice open our guts, it would cover the surface area of a tennis court. It's a major part of absorption for our body. And, the lining of our gut is bound together by these little tight junctions. And when there's inflammation in those junctions, they open up. And what we're putting into our body starts to leak through into our total systemic vascular system, causing this immune upregulation. So then we have inflammation, and we have all these neuroimmunological loops that are really kind of burdening the body with more inflammation. So here's how it goes. So environmental factors and things from our environment have everything to do with what we touch, we breathe, and we feel, right? So, I love this when I learned that we eat about 1 liter a day. We touch about 1/4 of a cup a day, or put things on, lotions or things that we're putting on our skin goes into our body. And we breathe in 40 liters of fluid a day on a typical day. So everything that we're putting into our body, the toxins, even emotional stress or stress within the environment, dysbiotic organisms can be, for anywhere from something like C. difficile, which is a gut bacteria which will end you up in the hospital, to something that's more insidious that you kind of live with, a different bacteria. All of that goes in. All of these factors go in. And then our gut has to absorb them. And they either reject them, and we have an inflammatory process, or they absorb them and they go within the cell, and we have no inflammatory insult. But a lot of times, we're putting in a lot of inflammation. And that inflammation then leads to increased inflammatory cytokines, leakage of lipopolysaccharides and other inflammatory factors, and around and around and around you go. When we eat, we make decisions about food about 6 to 8 times a day, and that's like a moderate assessment. And what we put into our body has so much effect on our overall systemic health. So when you have this kind of leaky gut inflammatory cycle going around and around and around, you have this immune upregulation, this autoimmunity, other systemic pathology, and then pain, right? We just learned in the systematic review that most people after TBI have chronic pain. So this talk is going to be really about controlling inflammation, because I think inflammation is key. And I'm often asked, what is the right diet for my child, or what do you think we should do? Paleo or autoimmune paleo, or what's the right thing? And I think it's the right diet for the right person, because it depends on is your kid a picky eater? Do you have the finances for some of these foods? What's the willingness for the parents? So I don't think there's a right diet or a global diet for everybody. I think it's all individualized. So in order to find that, we have to take into account lots of different variables. So finding the right diet, healing the gut, and we'll talk about different things on, what could you possibly be putting into your kiddo's gut that's having, the sequelae of inflammation and pain after TBI. We'll talk about what methylation is and how to address methylation, which can be very important, how to replete some of their nutritional deficiencies, and how maybe even intermittent fasting can increase something called brain-derived nootropic factor, which is basically growth hormone for your brain. So I like this. It's basically, this guy's, well, he's thinking he's eating right? But, it's all perception. I have many people that come in and are like, well, we're on the perfect diet. We're eating well, we're eating right. But, it has to do with what your own immune system is reacting for. So, for eggs, sometimes eggs can be fantastic for some people. For other people, it's a highly inflammatory, allergic food that they don't need to eat. So, it's individualized, and there has to be a lot of education that goes into this. So, what is some of the just really core principles of good gut health? Like I said, eggs aren't great for everyone, and not all of us have access to really specialized testing. Now we can test food antibodies, we can test food through stool, we can test food through blood, we can test food through doing, off-gassing or breath testing. But really the gold standard across all disciplines of medicine is if you want to figure out are you eating an inflammatory food, just try an elimination diet. And what that looks like is you take out the top most highly inflammatory foods for 21 days. So here's pretty much the top 5. You take them out for 21 days, and 21 days is key because I've had a lot of people say, well, I went gluten-free for a week and it did nothing. Well, your antibodies that you're producing towards gluten take at least 21 days to decrease by half. So, it's like a vaccine response with foods. You take them away, and then once you reintroduce them, you're going to have more of a virulent reaction to that food, so you're going to notice symptoms. But the key is you just can't take all away these foods for 21 days and then say, oh, well, I tried it, and I don't know if I noticed any difference. You have to put them back in one at a time, 2 doses a day for 3 days in a row, so give your body a good load. And if it's like a vaccine, they'll be like, oh, I remember eggs. No, we weren't tolerating eggs very well. Whereas before you might not have had diarrhea and irritable bowels, but you had this low level of inflammation and insult and intolerance that now that it's disappeared, your body's like, oh yeah, I remember, and I don't like it, don't give it to me. So you'll see symptoms. So say you do that with eggs and you notice symptoms. Well, then you say, okay, eggs are off the table for about a year, and we'll try again. And then you just make your way through the list. And that sounds really easy. And when you tell somebody, okay, it's just 21 days, just try for 21 days, I think that it becomes more feasible, and you don't have to do a lot of testing for that. So try the 21-day diet. See what your inflammatory triggers are via food. Next is, to make sure that your kiddos are, yes?
I'm sorry, when you were saying to reintroduce the food, if you don't have a reaction, do you allow them to do that particular food while they introduce the second?
You got it. Exactly. So it's like, oh, great, we ate omelets for 3 days in a row, and then we had scrambled eggs for dinner and an omelet for breakfast, and everybody did well. Okay. But this is the key with food reactions. So it might not be diarrhea. It could be, man, they didn't sleep all that day. They were hyperactive. They had eczema. I truly believe that eczema is a food allergy until otherwise proven. So, once you put it back in, if there's skin flares, well, that's the food. That's not, oh, here's this mysterious eczema that's coming back. It's your immune system is not tolerating an input. So, in our kiddos, we really very rarely have them eat enough protein. So, focusing on protein is really important with kids. And you can do that not just by saying, okay, we're going to have hamburgers 3 times a day, but, protein comes from nuts and seeds, eggs if you tolerate them, it can come from legumes, and then, it comes from different animal sources. And if you tolerate dairy, whole fat, organic dairy, it could be a potentially good source of protein as well. I will say be careful with kids because you don't want them to drink too much milk because 1, you'll become iron deficient. 2, it will bring in a satiety level that they're not going to want to eat other things. So really with kids, when you think about it, we're the only mammals on this planet that drink another mammal's milk, right? So why are we even drinking milk in the first place? We really don't need it. You need to eat whole food. So I would say, over one, if you want to give your kid oat milk, limit it to 4 ounces a day. And then, of course, over one, you want to try to make sure it's not in a bottle and you take it out of the bottle. The phytonutrient diversity. There's so many times where our patients come to me and they eat 4 foods and they're all beige. It's like macaroni, cheese, and chicken nuggets, and maybe some spaghetti that is just like with the butter on it, and they won't even have the red sauce. I mean, our bodies are meant to eat lots of different nutrients and seasonally. Like, we didn't have strawberries all year round, right? I mean, strawberries only came once a year, and different vegetables and fruits. We're supposed to eat with the seasons, and we're supposed to eat the rainbow. So lots of different nutrients. And this is the thing about kids that I hear all the time is, my kid won't do that. There's no way my kid is going to eat that. It's not going to happen. The thing is we teach our children how to eat. We can't force them to eat either, though. So we can't chew, digest, swallow, absorb their food for them. So we're not responsible for what they eat. We're responsible for what we provide them to eat. So if you have a super picky kid, then you put a really good plate of food in front of them, and if they're like, not gonna happen, Mom, then you just be like, well, all right, I guess you're not very hungry. You can get down and we'll try again at the next scheduled meal or snack time, period. And then if they refuse the next meal, you try again at dinner. If they refuse that, you try again at breakfast. I've never had one child in 15 years go more than 1 day without eating. It works, you just have to have some tough love in it. And tough love meaning you're not forcing them to eat, you're taking the emotion out of it. You don't want to eat it? Okay, I respect that, that's fine, you must not be that hungry, get down. We'll try again. And then you keep providing them with foods that eventually they'll eat, they will eat, I promise you they're going to eat. So, in that phytonutrient diversity, it's good to try to incorporate some fermented foods. So fermented foods, for some, yogurt is a good fermented food, kombucha, sauerkraut. So if a food is fermented, it's more likely to be probiotic rich. And then, we could do a whole talk on our microbiome and the importance of the microbiome. But we want good bacteria in our gut. And especially the younger that you are, the more bacteria that you need. Because you're really building the immune system, and we're just at the cusp of really understanding what the microbiome does. And the microbiome is just the bacteria in our gut. From our mouth to our anus, and everywhere in between, it's all lined with bacteria, but especially in our gut, we're finding out things like different colonies actually are what help us regulate our weight more. If some people have more, Firmicutes versus Bacteroidetes, it's really interesting, the science behind it. But the take home for today is you want to put probiotic rich foods in there. And this is where people go wrong all the time. They're like, oh, I get my kid probiotics. Great. Where's their prebiotic fiber? So probiotics feed off of prebiotics. So prebiotics are like bananas and jicama, garlic, artichoke. You can even get some supplements that are probiotic or prebiotic over the counter. But if you're taking probiotics, you have to feed your probiotics their favorite prebiotic food, or they're just really kind of a waste of money. They'll have limited efficacy, but they've done studies showing you eat a prebiotic fiber after, and that 20 billion colony of the probiotic, it multiplies like at an exponential rate once it's fed the prebiotic fiber. So you just took your probiotic and you made it, like 10 times more potent when you put the prebiotic fiber in. So not a lot of kids have problems with alcohol, but adults especially, limiting alcohol after a traumatic brain injury is especially important. Sugar is another thing. Sugar is actually the top 3 foods when you look at what the literature says of the top 8. Sugar's number 3 that people can be allergic to. I know you've all heard parents say, oh gosh, my kid can't have that, he'll go crazy. And then there are some parents that are like, yeah, whatever, you're lying? Like, that doesn't happen with foods. But then you see the kid that definitely gets the, if it's the dye or the high sugar food, and they go, their behavior goes from 0 to 90 in 3 minutes. Well, sugar's inflammatory. it is incredibly inflammatory for our bodies, and if it's inflammatory for our bodies, it's going to be inflammatory for our brain. Our brain also needs a lot of healthy fat. So I was taught in elementary school that fat makes you fat, and what we've learned is fat really doesn't make you fat at all. Sugar makes you fat. It has everything to do with sugar, not so much with the fats that we put in. And in fact, a child's brain, or our brains right now, are half the weight of them are just pure fat. We need a lot of good, healthy, essential fats to rebuild our brains and to keep healthy brains. And men or boys, until about their 27, their brain is growing in size. Women and females, it's about 24. So I always tell my teenagers, I'm like, your parent actually does know more than you at this point because their brains are bigger. I'm like, well, when you're in your 20s, you'll have to negotiate. But, you know, like Dr. Clark was saying, all of our teenagers think they know more than us anyway. So that's very important. And then water. Everybody asks me, well, how much water should I be drinking? Well, the kind of golden rule is take your weight, divide it in half, drink that much in ounces a day. And coffee doesn't count, soda doesn't count, tea doesn't count, all these other things count. My husband was going through this PowerPoint looking for spelling errors, okay, I'm like, just go through and make sure I haven't spelled anything wrong. And he goes, but don't you need to put just drink fluids? And like Monster counts, I was like, no, Monster, energy drinks, nothing, water. Water, we need water, that's all we need. So here's a study showing about glucose. So glucose, or sugar, enhancing neurotoxicity and inflammatory cytokines, where it's just inflammation molecules is what inflammatory cytokines are. So this showed, which I think is really compelling, is that hyperglycemia, or high glucose, and type 2 diabetes may be one of the factors contributing to the observed increased risk of Alzheimer's disease by exacerbating this neuroinflammation and cascade that follows from it. So those that have uncontrolled type 2 diabetes are more likely for cognitive decline later in life. Isn't that interesting? So there's a neurologist that's in the functional medicine world, David Perlmutter. He talks about this a lot. If you guys have never read any of his books, he does some really amazing things. Okay, ketogenic diet. We're going good on time. Have any of you in the room ever tried the ketogenic diet? Okay, so we got a couple of people. Ketogenic diet, I thought it was really interesting. Dr. Clark says, well, if they have a tube, you can try the ketogenic diet. Well, you don't actually have to have a tube to do the ketogenic diet, but I get what he's saying is that it's hard, and it's hard for a child, and it's hard to be compliant for it, but there's some amazing research that it can really help traumatic brain injury and other neurodevelopmental and neurology-associated disorders. So here we go. What is it? Well, it mimics the fasting state. So our glucose, it switches the glucose metabolism to the metabolism of ketones. What you're doing is high-fat, low-carbohydrate. So we got about a 4-to-1 ratio. Where people go really wrong is they just eat a bunch of meat. They're like, oh, I'm on the keto diet, so I'm just eating lots of meat, lots of beef, and lots of eggs, and lots of cheese. But it's really, you got it, it's about the carbohydrate fat ratio, not about the old Atkins diet and lots of protein. So really, really high protein actually can be very harmful for your kidneys, so I'd watch it with that. So what you do is basically the mechanism of action is attributed to the formation of something called these ketone bodies, especially one called beta-hydroxybutyrate, that puts you into this place of glycolysis and really enhances your mitochondrial metabolism. So remember the mitochondria, those little organelles intracellularly that Dr. Womack was talking about, that we're really feeding them with that good oxygen? Well, our mitochondria are so complex, and they need so many different nutrients, and they're the ones that are producing adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is our energy molecules. So, you know, a lot of people with thyroid problems think, oh gosh, I got thyroid problems, so I've got a lot of fatigue. Well, do you know that your thyroid actually stimulates your mitochondria to produce energy? So you really have a mitochondrial issue, and your thyroid may be part of the signaling problem for it. But these little mitochondria are really, really important. So if you're going to strictly try the ketogenic diet, it's less than 20 grams of carbohydrates daily. Moderate would be 40 to 50 grams of carbs a day. And then you can do you can buy them at Walgreens, get the little ketosis sticks. I will have to warn you though, sometimes you get false negatives with those where you're like, oh, I cannot believe it, I've done everything perfect and it's barely showing up that I have any ketones. So sometimes those are reliable, sometimes they aren't. You can actually go onto Amazon and get the blood monitoring strips of it. They're just really expensive. I think each time you do it, it's like $5 if you're checking blood. And on kids, it's a little harder to check blood than it is dipping a urine. But if you're an adult and you're doing the ketogenic diet, sometimes it just keeps you honest and it keeps you compliant and it keeps you motivated. Other than the pitfalls of people just eating way too much meat is I think that, we really kind of limit our vegetables, fruits, and man, if you got a picky eater doing a ketogenic diet, sometimes maybe the only way you're going to get it to happen is if they do have it too. So, like I said, the right diet for the right person in the right situation, but it's a tool. It's a tool. Here's other things that the ketogenic diet has worked for. So drug-resistant epilepsy, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, brain tumors, autism, migraines, and then traumatic brain and stroke, and ALS. Here's that great thing that I was talking about. So the principal ketone that is doing the most work in the ketogenic diet is beta-hydroxybutyrate. So here's just a little picture of that. So the principal ketone is not just super fuel, but it's more efficiently in producing that good energy, a molecule ATP, than glucose or fatty acids. So it's better than, eating sugar for fuel. Ketone bodies can just be, you would think, oh, I'm not eating enough carbohydrates, I'm going to have this major kind of lack in energy or activity. Well, it takes 3 days to get into ketosis, so there's some really, those first 3 days you might be a little cranky, there's a period of transition, but once you're really in it, man, you have more clarity, you can really go, you have more energy, and you feel great. I've done it myself just for health reasons before, and you really have a percent of clarity that you're like, the fog is kind of lifted, it's great. So, and no wonder, because look, it comes back down to inflammation, right? Look at all the things that the ketogenic diet's doing. So it's increasing this thing called nuclear factor kappa B, which is part of the inflammatory cascade. It's helping us form new mitochondria. It's helping with that ATP production. It's reducing reactive oxygen species, which is also just oxidative stress in your system. Reducing apoptosis, programmed cell death, which hyperbarics does as well. Increasing insulin sensitivity, and look at that, increasing leptin sensitivity. So leptin is what makes us feel satiated. It turns the hunger down. It makes you go, I only needed half of that and I'm ready to push away. There's so many people in the pharmaceutical industry that they're like, how can we manage leptin? How can we manage leptin? And nobody's really been able to figure it out, I think, in a way that's healthy yet. But the ketogenic diet will. So kind of some of the keys on the ketogenic diet, just key things that you would be eating. Coconut oil, it's high in that beta-hydroxybutyrate. Coconut oil does things like increases beta oxidation of fats. You can put it in a smoothie, you can use it for stir fry, you can use it, you can really use it at high heat. Avocados are really well. Avocados also increase something called glutathione, which we're going to get to and talk about. And here's your grass-fed beef. I like how the beef is in the grass for this little thing. But I often have people that'll come to me on a vegetarian diet, and I understand if you don't want to eat animals for religious reasons, but often vegetarians become very sick people because there's a lot of really great things that are in meat for us to eat, really good quality meat. And then broccoli is also one of the things that you would be eating on a ketogenic diet. And the news about broccoli is it's a sulforaphane vegetable. It increases also the metabolism of something called your endo-3 carbinol, which actually metabolizes out estrogen. So ladies, if you ever get a little cranky around your period, increasing your cruciferous vegetables actually, a week before can help you metabolize out some of your harmful estrogens. And it's another one of the foods that are allowed on the ketogenic diet. So trans fats, I think that most people know that you should not be eating trans fats. I don't know what just happened there. There we go. Trans fats are partially hydrogenated oils. Trans fats are not the healthy fats that I'm talking about, but actually we put hydrogen into a fat, and what it did was it made it more shelf stable, so it didn't go rancid as quickly. But it actually is very pro-inflammatory for our bodies. So we want to stay away from things like, if you see something on the label called partially hydrogenated or trans fat, stay away from it completely. Here are the good fats that you want to go to though. So we have that great extra virgin olive oil, grapeseed, avocado, flax, and coconut. A warning about olive oil is you just don't put it at a very high smoke point because it'll become rancid if you try to fry with it. You really need to keep it about under 320 degrees Fahrenheit. So the other ones like coconut and grapeseed, they have a very high smoke point. You can cook with them at a higher temperature. Okay, methylation. Methylation's become kind of a hot word in the last, 5 years. And methylation it's a biochemical process that's happening in our body billions and billions of times a second. So what it is just one hydrogen attached to 2 carbons, and it's this metabolism that's dependent on our genes. So we put in an input into our environment. Let's say we'll put in folates or folinic acid, or not folinic acid, say folic acid. Well, that folic acid has to go through this methylation process to give us something called methylfolate, which methyl is incredibly important for building serotonin and dopamine. So it's this biochemical dance that we're doing in our body, and we've come to understand since we've unmapped the human genome just in 2009 that we have a lot of common variants in methylation that cause us not to be great methylators. If you're a poor methylator, you're going to have prolonged recovery from traumatic brain injury. So methylation does lots of great things. It helps us detox. It helps us create that glutathione that's very important for detox, neurotransmitters, and absorbing our nutrients. So we won't do a biochemistry lesson because you guys will all fall asleep, but this is kind of a snapshot on some of the methylation I was talking about with folates and the neurotransmitter and transsulfuration pathways. So there are things, so why does somebody get hit in the head or have an injury and some recover better than others if there's no, specific thing, like it's a very big bleed and they had to be hospitalized, and it's just more of this insidious, we got a concussion, but we never really threw up, or we had a brain injury and we never had to be hospitalized, nobody did an image, but we just have this chronic pain afterwards, there's still this headache, I don't know what's going on. Well, we're genetically vulnerable, based on all of these things that are predisposing us, right? So if we have problems with some of these genes, and then if we're doing things like we're dehydrated, we have a concurrent illness, we have, we're overtraining, or we have just a baseline of inflammation in our body. Martha Hebert is one of the best, she's a PhD MD from Harvard, who's one of the leaders in the autism revolution on how do we treat autism. And she has coined something called the body burden, where, we're all on this continuum of health, right? From 0 to 10. Let's say that once you get to 10, it's the tipping point for disease. So if we can just tip the scales back towards wherever your inflammatory potential are, if you have a 2 insult and you're sitting at an 8, well, you're going to have a headache, right? But if you're sitting at a 2 and you have a 2 insult, you're going to be at a 4, so you might not notice a headache. You might be okay, because we're all in this continuum of health. Does that make sense? So it depends on where you were before the traumatic brain injury. What was your inflammatory potential in the first place? So here's probably one that most people have heard about, if you've heard about any with methylation, is the MTHFR variant. This variant in particular decreases the conversion of folate into the methylated form. If you have this, you have a lot of increased risk for all of these things up there, among more. And then there's two variants. There's the 6717, the 1298C. And I'm putting these up here because your doctor can actually write, if they can easily check this. Now most labs, even, you can check an MTHFR. You don't have to see a functional medicine physician or have, an integrated. You can actually ask them, well, can you check an MTHFR for me? So these variants, basically, if we go back here, so right there, here's MTHFR right there in the middle. Well, if you see, those are like cogs in a wheel going around billions of times a second, and then one thing feeds into the other cycle. So if you have an MTHFR variant, it feeds into the neurotransmitter cycle that then goes down to help as be a cofactor for dopamine, a cofactor for serotonin. So if you're stuck in the middle and you're not, you're not methylating well, then you don't have the cofactors that are going to give you the ability. Now do you know that methylfolate can be just as effective as an antidepressant for depression? It is remarkable. Now the drug companies don't like to hear that, but it is 100% the truth, and I see it in my practice all the time. This is the thing, is nobody says exactly how much you're supposed to give. There's no NIH guideline, there's no guideline from the American Academy of Pediatrics. The people that are really into nutrigenomics is what we're talking about, and methylation. Some people will say, well, you need, what the government says 400 micrograms or 600 micrograms of methylfolate. And then some people will say, oh, you need 15 milligrams 3 times a day. I mean, it is very wide on the dosaging for this. So what I've found in my practice is usually between 10 and 15 milligrams once to twice a day is what most people need, depending on their variant. So the 677T is more significant. And then depending on their response. So, if you start too high, a lot of times you feel worse before you feel better. You'll have headaches. Your kid will have more stimming. Your kid will have more irritability and upregulation. So if that happens, you just have to go back down, start low, go slow, and build up over time. But like I said, it's very dependent on each child and their phenotype, what is their genotype leading into it. So here's what your doctor can do. If you go and say, I want some labs done because I want to know some biomarkers that can help me have better control my inflammation. So high sensitive C-reactive protein is basically kind of an overall inflammatory marker in your body. Some doctors are more comfortable with the CRP, so maybe they'll run that versus the other. You can actually do an essential fatty acid profile through CPL. You can look at a magnesium. I would caution you that looking at a magnesium in the serum is a snapshot of what you've eaten within the past 24 hours, but you can look at a red blood cell saturated magnesium and it's a much more specific value. Vitamin D, homocysteine is again one of those ones that if it's high, you're a poor methylator. If it's low, which often in children it's low, they need different support like glutathione or N-acetylcysteine. And then serum glutathione. You can actually do all of these through CPL, so you don't have to have a specialist to run them. And they're, just because you have the genotype for something or the experience of something, it doesn't mean that that's actually what's going on in your body. So there's a term in genetics that the genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So even if you have an MTHFR 6717 and your homocysteine, which is a marker that that's working well, if that is, about 7 to 9, then maybe you don't need methylfolate. Maybe you do because it just makes you feel better too. So there's still a little bit of an art in what you give. Okay, we're really running out of time. How much longer do you think I have?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about different nutritional supplements in TBI. So these are like, this made the top list. This is definitely not conclusive of everything that could potentially help, but these are the top ones with the most research. Here we go. So this is just about C-reactive protein, again showing, oh, by the way, food does matter, and it can lower inflammation if you eat the right diet. So here it is. I think it's really kind of funny when doctors say, changing your diet really is going to matter. Because, if we don't eat, what happens? We die? Isn't food that important that we need it to sustain life? So, anyway, CRP, you actually can change your diet and your inflammation will go down. So here's about omegas. So how much do you give, what kind do you give, and what's the science behind it, right? Well, when we were evolving as a species, there was a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3s. Now, when I run that essential fatty acid profile, there is so much omega-6s in our diet, it's unbelievable. People have like a 40-to-1 ratio now. It's unbelievable. Omega-6 we need some, but it is way more pro-inflammatory. So we're really the optimal value, it should be about 1-to-1. That's what we want to strive for. So, omega-6s comes from grains. A lot of grains come from omega-6s. I'll show you. Here it is. Omega-6 here. This is my favorite slide to show people. And I think it was the biggest aha moment for me when I was taught this, is that, okay, now this is how sugar causes high cholesterol. I didn't get it before I saw this. Okay, here's omega-6s, right? This is like a cascade that happens. You put in peanuts, vegetable oils, sunflower, vegetable oils, and grains up there, and then all the way down the line, you get to these different acids. Arachidonic acid here is the most pro-inflammatory thing we can do one of the most pro-inflammatory things we can do for our body. So omega-3s that comes from flax and walnut and canola, soy, chia, and hemp, those, if we just put those in, eventually we get that EPA and DHA. Well, that's what's on your omega-3 fatty acids, right? Your fish oil, if you look at the back, it's like, here's EPA, here's DHA. We're putting that into bodies because we know it's good for inflammation. It lowers total inflammation, less inflammatory ecosanoids there. So this is what happens though. Okay, you do all this work to put in these good omega-3s, and there's this enzyme right there called delta-5 desaturase. It's upregulated from insulin. Okay, so when we eat sugar, our pancreas secretes insulin. So high insulinemia, or high insulin in the body, takes all of our good fats and it shunts it towards arachidonic acid. So even if we're avoiding lots of grains and all of these things that are up here, and shellfish and lots of dairy, if we're eating a lot of sugar, it's not going to matter because we're going to shunt over towards an inflammatory molecule rather than doing all this, anti-inflammatory work that we're doing. So sugar matters. Sugar changes your cholesterol. And do you know that every time that you eat sugar, especially high fructose corn syrup, it turns into fat in your liver? Isn't that interesting? So sugar, again, gotta watch it. Here's the studies, here's the science. This is the mortality was decreased in cardiovascular disease when they had this omega-3 to omega-6 when they shifted. So here's it's supposed to be, all your omega-3 fatty acids to your omega-6. You see the ratio? This is where we all are, most of us, unless we're doing some good work. This is where we most of us need to be. So different things have been studied with different ratios, but the key to this story is we want to not have as much omega-6 in our diet. We want to not have as much dairy. We don't want to have as much grains. We definitely don't want to have a lot of sugar. And when we target essential fatty acids, they should be omega-3s. Don't take omega-6s. I guarantee you have enough in your body. So DHA is another thing that's been studied widely in traumatic brain injury. So we see that this type of fish oil, so fish oil for omega-3s is DHA and EPA, and a lot of people are like, well, what's doing what and what's the right ratio? Well, DHA is shown to have a lot of decrease in exocytotoxicity, oxidative stress, and inflammation. It's been shown to reduce glutamate. So glutamate is that excitatory neurotransmitter that causes a lot of irritability and aggression and a lot of upregulation that we're all trying to mitigate after TBI. And it's also been shown to reduce oxidative stress or just inflammatory stress upon the body. So if you're a vegetarian, you can still get this. So the prescription for vegetarians is If you want to do fish oils and you're a vegetarian, you got to get it from algae. That's pretty much where you go. So most things that you're going to do for vegetarian fish oil are going to be sourced from algae. You can also eat more of those things that were on that omega-3. So remember, canola that's non-GMO, flax, hemp, and chia. Those all are high in alpha-linoleic acid, which is also, it's a precursor to those good omega-3s. This said, that, at the bottom, lab monitoring might be recommended. In my clinic, we do blood spot fatty acid testing, so we don't have to go get a kiddo to get a full blood draw. But even if you don't do that, it doesn't have to be monitored. I think just even being mindful of what the shifts can be pretty impactful. So if you're not a vegetarian, I like to get fish oil. The ratio from EPA to DHA should be about 1.5 to 1. EPA is usually higher. I see a lot of people that put their kids on only DHA. No, they need both. They need EPA as well. And this is the thing, and this even is for a 2-year-old, right? 1.5 grams, less than 1.5 grams is not going to be effective. More than 7 grams of fish oil has no added benefit. So, a lot of people are like, well, I'm taking my omegas, they're taking 500 milligrams a day. That's not enough. So you got to look for more highly concentrated products. There are products that are, liquid. There are products that are, tablets. So we can do it with kids. You just got to get creative with which product they like. Barleans is one that's really super sweet that a lot of kids like, but Nordic Naturals has always been my favorite ones to source omegas through, and they have some liquid ones as well. Okay, so turmeric and curcumin. This is another thing on the hot list of the things that could be beneficial after TBI. Curcumin, the active component is turmeric. Turmeric has been found to reduce the action of oxidative stress and increase, something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is really good for brain regeneration. And believe it or not, they also have synergistic effects with putting somebody on a fish oil as well. So if you do both of them together. Usually it's not going to be one thing. With nutrition, it's not one pill for one ill and you're done. It's not going to be an Advil and then you feel better 30 minutes later. Usually it takes a couple of different things. If you're going to treat nutraceutically, you usually can't get it done in just one thing. You usually need a basket of things. Turmeric is really powerful though. It has lots of studies. It downregulates something called nuclear factor kappa B, COX and LOX inhibitors, and inhibition of inducible nitric oxide synthase. So all of that speak is just, it's really good for inflammation. Super, super good for inflammation. So I know we're talking about TBI today, but really for most inflammatory things, turmeric can be very good. But here's a prescription. So when you look at your label of it, you want to make sure that it's at least 95% curcuminoids, and then really anywhere from 750 to 1,500 milligrams a day is very, very safe. I have never had anybody that's had a reaction from turmeric or curcumin, ever, ever, ever. I don't know if anyone else has had a reaction to it, but it's very rare. Okay, and then vitamin D. This is one that really anytime you get your blood work done, your kids, yourself, you should draw your vitamin D level, period. I mean, you should always add it no matter what. Your doctor can code it to where your insurance should cover it. The thing is vitamin D is a hormone. It's not a vitamin. It has all of these amazing things that it does for your body. It has neuroprotective and vascular protective roles. It even does something called decreased actinic keratosis, which is those little crusty spots you get as you age from too much sun. Even that will decrease. The effects of vitamin D are so, it's amazing. Skeletal health, things for your central nervous system, for your hair and skin. We know it for immune regulation. We know it in our kids. It needs for muscle signaling and bone building. It also helps with cell proliferation and apoptosis. Again, that program cell death. Here's where people go wrong with vitamin D. They don't give enough. So if I were to do a level, those levels say normal range is 30 to 100. Now, looking at this slide, why wouldn't you want it to be near 100? If it does all of those great things, let's max them out. If this is how you can replete based on your level. But the truth of the matter is some of us have genetic variants where we don't absorb vitamin D very well. It's called your vitamin D receptor gene. If you're homozygous for it, you can take 10,000 units a day and never get toxic, ever, ever, ever. If you don't have that variant and you take 10,000 units a day, you might get toxic. Toxicity of vitamin D is very, very rare. It is such a safe thing to give. If you're going to give high doses of vitamin D, it's just judicious to check it in about 3 months. So in most kids under the age of 10 can deal with 4,000 units a day very, very easily. Most kids from 10 to 18, anywhere from 5 to 10,000 units a day, they can deal with that. If you're nervous about that all, or your doctors, just check their level, because it depends on your gene variant. I personally have the vitamin D homozygous. I take 10,000 a day, and I stay at 50. I can't get above 50. I mean, I'm sure if I went up to 20, I could probably get a little bit higher, but I stay at 50 with supplementing high doses. And if you give vitamin D, say you're older and you're giving vitamin D, and you really want to make sure that you're doing bone, well, I guess that really should count for anyone that's having bone mineralization stuff. If you give a little bit of vitamin K with it, it makes sure that the vitamin D gets to the bone. So, here's methylfolate. The thing about methylfolate is you're going to see it on the back of your prescription bottle. It's going to say quadrafolate. It's also going to say active folate. It's going to say L5-MTHF or 5-MTHF. If it doesn't have an L in front of it, you better be taking it sublingually so it absorbs into your body better. If it has an L in front of it, you can take it orally and it will absorb into your body. So folate deficiency in traumatic brain injury, it's like the one nutrient that if you're good before you have an injury, it's going to help you so much after the injury in recovery. Folate is incredibly, incredibly important. It's a life-giving nutrient. That's why we're told when we're pregnant to, you better take folic acid. Well, some of us can't break down folic acid, so it's actually toxic for us. What we need is the methylated form of folate that then helps us build and repair DNA and make our healthy babies. So, depending on your variants, depending on your need, I did it again. Oh, no, I didn't. Where people go wrong with folate is folate has cofactors. So, giving B12 with folate is important. That's a good cofactor to get on it. And then most people underdose it. So here it is, the vitamins over the counter contain folic acid. Depending on your gene variability, most people can't tolerate it, and that's in about 40 to 60% of the population. It's a lot of us. I personally, postpartum, I had a tough time postpartum after my first baby, and I was put on Lexapro for several years. And it wasn't until I started really understanding methylation and my own genetic variants, I was able to wean off my antidepressant, take high doses of methylfolate, and I have never had a problem since. It has been life-changing for me. And maybe that's why I feel so passionate about looking at this, because I know in my own experience how wonderful it's been. So it's a biochemical pathway, what we do. We just don't put in folic acid and then it does its thing. It has to become these biologically active components. Okay, I've talked about glutathione a couple of times, and basically glutathione is the most potent antioxidant in our body, 65 times more powerful than vitamin C. I think I should be wrapping it up. And it helps us detoxify drugs. It helps keep our liver active. I would tell you, if your child is on an epileptic drug, you should put them on glutathione because it helps keep their liver healthy. So, we're monitoring liver enzymes when people are on drugs because we're watching to see, is the AST and the LH, are they signaling pain? Are they signaling that something's going on? Put them on glutathione and it can be protective. I'm done, aren't I?
You are.
Yeah. Okay. So there's more to the story. I can get my PowerPoint and give it to you guys so you can see the rest of it. Basically, I talked about after this just magnesium and then intermittent fasting, how important that can be as well. So that's about it.